It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Hello, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. Got an action-packed show for you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Priuses, the cars, the Prius, because I own them and have been having some fun conversations on Facebook, and I want to share a bit about that. And then we're going to talk about how to retire before the age of 59 and a half. Most people have a bulk of their money in 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, Roth IRAs, things like that. We're going to talk about that. And then after all of that, we're going to have some real fun with Ryan Cragun. His book is called How to Defeat Religion in 10 Easy Steps. And I love it. So pay attention to that and learn how you can go out and help defeat religion. But before we get to that, I'm going to circle back around, and we're going to talk about Priuses, or I think is the proper way to say it in plural. My regular listeners know, of course, I am a huge fan of the Toyota Prius car line. And matter of fact, I like all hybrid cars, and I love the idea of the future of electric cars. And yes, I know there are Tesla cars, which up till now have been pretty expensive, but the price keeps dropping. There's other cars like the Nissan Leaf, which runs only on electricity, and it only gets about 100 miles in warm weather. And, of course, there's also a Chevy Volt, which is a fine vehicle, and if I understand correctly, it now gets close to 50 miles on a charge before it converts over to a normal electric gas kind of hybrid thing, and it has a miles per gallon of around 40 after the battery is depleted, the bigger battery that runs on electricity only. And since I've had such wonderful success with the Priuses, Priuses, I got another one. I got a Prius Prime, and the big perk that has is it can also plug into the wall and charge up. Now, the downside is it gets only 25 miles, so it's kind of on the low end of cars that have big batteries as far as distance, and Toyota has been very conservative in this process. The nice thing is that once the battery, there's many batteries, once the EV, we'll call it the EV battery, the electric-only mode battery, is depleted, which means it only goes down a portion because that makes batteries last longer, it goes back into normal Prius hybrid mode. And in that mode, it's rated, EPA rating is 55 miles per gallon. Now, in the last month, I have gotten nowhere close to that because it's been freaky cold out. So when you run the seat warmers and you run the steering wheel heater and you have to sit there and defrost the car and the car has to warm up, because one of the things a Prius wants to do is burn fuel efficiently, so it is prone to running the engine more than what might be necessary because a warm engine burns fuel more efficiently. So if you in a short drive, it's going to hurt your performance. So in the extreme cold, it's been in the low to mid 40s as far as miles per gallon in the hybrid mode. But when I include the electricity that I used, so far the first tank full of gas, I guess, I averaged 64.6 miles per gallon. I'm hoping in the summer I'm going to get some averages in the 80s and 90s, maybe even 100 miles per gallon of gasoline, which, of course, clever listeners know I'm cheating because I'm not including the electricity. So I had a few people on Facebook ask me about why not including the electricity. Well, I wasn't exactly sure how to calculate it in, and I did some more research. And it turns out that a car running on electricity, as far as an energy conservation and performance issue, it's much more efficient at using electricity than it is at using gasoline. Of course, the problem is the batteries. Batteries are expensive. Batteries are heavy. And one of the logics of Toyota is that 25 miles will cover the round trip work from home to office for more than half of the consumers. If you're able to charge some or fully back at the office, it covers something like 85% of drivers' round trips each day to and from work. So it might make sense for your company to put in some charging stations, for you to ask them to put in a charging station, but it may not be practical. So you just get the first 25 miles. And the longer the car goes on electricity, of course, the more batteries you have, the heavier the car, and the less miles per gallon you would get if it also uses gasoline, which the Nissan Leaf and the Teslas do not. And there's a couple other cars that they go on electric only, and it creates a thing called range anxiety. So if you're just going to be in town, like I live in Champaign-Urbana, just driving around Champaign-Urbana, I see quite a few Nissan Leaf cars. They get up to 100 miles on electricity, and if you're doing a few errands or shopping, it's great. But if I need to go to Chicago and back, which is 120, 130 miles one way and then back, I'm going to have a real problem doing that in a Nissan Leaf. I'm going to have to find somewhere halfway up to charge. I'm going to have to find somewhere in the Chicago suburb that I'm going to charge. I'm going to have to find somewhere to charge on the way back. Now, part of that is solved with Tesla because they have quicker charging, and they also now have the supercharging. So you could probably drive all the way to the Chicago suburb that you wanted to, and in 3 or 4 hours while you're visiting your friends, charge and then drive right back. Awesome. If you want to take a long trip, there's probably now enough Tesla charging stations around the country to charge, and usually you can do that over lunch or dinner, but it's not quite as convenient yet as pulling up and in 5 minutes putting 10, 15 gallons of gas in your car and driving another 400 miles. So we're working our way there. And for me, the Prius Prime was a nice compromise because I get 55 miles per gallon, which is pretty fantastic. But if I'm in town and I want to do some errands and go to the store, I can do that all on electric. And of course, cars that drive in electric, if you've not driven one, go to some dealership and find one. I don't care if it's a Volt, if it's a Prius, if it's a Leaf. You will be amazed at how smooth electric cars drive. You don't have that gearing as, first gear, second gear, third gear for a car. Now, if you really like that, especially if you like driving stick, you're not going to enjoy the electric feel, but it just goes. It just accelerates. It is very, very incredibly smooth. And matter of fact, it's deceptively smooth because it can be very easy for me in my car to go from 0 to 45 miles per hour on a road that's marked 35 and not feel like I'm going fast because it's just moving. One of the things I like to do is figure out how to make things more efficient and sometimes for efficiency's sake itself. So forgive me a little bit if this is not particularly interesting to you, but when I talk about a Prius, one of the questions I get most commonly is, well, what does it cost to replace the battery? Because you're not counting that into the cost. My snarky comeback is about the same as replacing an engine in a conventional car. And they say, well, that doesn't happen very often. Well, same thing with the Prius battery. I have two older Priuses, a 2005 and a 2006, one with 230,000 miles, one with 245,000 miles. They both have the original main battery pack. It also has a starter battery that's about the size of a motorcycle battery, and I replaced each of those at 200,000 miles. So you don't have a starter battery that you have to replace every 30, 40, 50,000 miles. So you do save some money there. But the main battery pack is a concern for people. And I found a nice story at Forbes, and I'll try to put the link in the show notes, but you could just Google Forbes replacing a dead Prius hybrid battery. So I wanted to cover this first because it's the first question everyone asks. And this guy talked about having a 2005 Prius, which is the one that I have, and he had over 100,000 miles already, which kind of freaked me out because I'm over 200,000 miles, and the battery faulted. And so he went and found out that it could cost between $3,000 and $4,000 to replace the battery. Well, luckily for him, and luckily for you now, listener, he went and did research and found out that there's a company, and there's more and more of these companies that will put in a replacement battery. It's not a new original battery, and a lot of mechanics don't want to mess with it. Not that it's particularly dangerous, it's just something new and different they're not used to. But there are companies that do this specialty. He was in the Houston, Texas area, so it's called Hometown Hybrids. And for $800, they came to his driveway, took out the battery that was in the car, tested it, and inside of the battery are individual cells. And usually when the battery fails or has a problem, it's not the entire battery is bad and completely worthless. Some of the cells now aren't retaining electricity or a charge. And so they will replace the ones that need to be replacing and put the main battery pack back in, all for $800. Now, it's not guaranteed for the life of the car. He said that in the story that he's supposed to get 50 to 70,000 miles. So it can add another several years to your car for $800. You can pay more than that to get a pair of struts, maybe. So it's not a horrible thing, but it's not that common. A lot of these cars go 200, 300, even 400,000 miles on the original battery pack. So I just wanted to cover that if that happens, that's the cost. It's less than replacing an engine in a car if the engine goes out. Other cost-saving things that I have experienced is virtually no repairs. Now, sure, I replaced a water pump on my car at 120,000 miles. I replaced, I think they call it a serpentine belt. Yeah, I know. I'm really knowledgeable about cars, so forgive me. I've done the tires, hoses. I made them change the hoses at some point just because I felt like they'd been in there long enough. And I did a headlight. Now, the headlight really hurt because the headlights, at least in my model year, the 2005, are designed to never be replaced because they never are supposed to stop working. So that was about $700 because they had to partially disassemble the front of the car to take out the headlight assembly. It's not like an old car where you could twist out a light bulb and buy one for $4 and twist it back in. I wish it was, but it's a complex array of LED lights and halogens and all that, and it's one giant piece, and you just replace it. So that was kind of pricey, but that's really all I've done in 230,000 miles. Matter of fact, my car has original brakes. And that's another thing that the guy in the Forbes article said that at 100,000 miles, he had to redo the brakes. I've got 230,000 miles on my car, have not redone the brakes. Not a thing. My wife's car, which is the 2006 Prius, we did do the front pads on her car at 230,000 miles, but only at my insistence. The mechanic said you've probably got another 40 or 50,000 miles to go before you need to do the pads, and the drums were only half worn at 230,000 miles. And I think that's in part because it also has magnetic braking. So if you brake slowly and gradually, it's done with magnetism and the magic of electricity and magnets. How do they work? And not two pieces of metal rubbing together and wearing down. So the brakes last a long time, very few repairs. And I figured out the cost for driving the car, at least the new one. If gasoline is $2.25, and it may be more or less in your area, and of course you may be listening to this at a different time, and gas is totally different, so you'll have to adjust. But at $2.25 a gallon, it will cost about 4.09 cents per mile to drive a new Prius. Ones that get in the 50s, 55. My wife's gets 56, so that's about 4 cents a mile. Now, in the electric-only part where in EV mode with the battery charged based on a national average of 11 cents per kilowatt hour, and of course, again, you can adjust this for your area, it is about 2.8 cents per mile to drive the car. So electricity on average is cheaper than $2.25 a gallon for fuel to move the same amount of distance. If you're in a place where electricity is 20 cents per kilowatt hour, well, this is not going to work out for you. This is going to actually increase your cost. However, if you're somewhere, and I've had a few people on Facebook tell me that they have 7 or 8 cents a kilowatt hour, or if gas goes back to $4 an hour, a gallon, all these things go into the mix. Now, one of the things that I like to do, and one of my driving motivations for buying a car like a Prius, is that I'm using less oil. Now, some people will, and they have again on Facebook, so I'm going to go right into this. They'll say, but the electricity is probably being made using coal or oil or natural gas, and it's creating the same amount of carbon dioxide. There is merit to that argument. I don't know the specifics of my electricity. In some places you can find out, and I'm sure I could if I made the effort, exactly where my electricity comes from. Maybe it's partly wind, maybe it's partly solar, maybe it's partly nuclear. But in Illinois, it's pretty safe to assume a good chunk of it is from coal. So I'm still creating carbon dioxide, but at 55 miles per gallon, I'm creating less than a car that gets 30 miles per gallon. But like I said at the beginning, I wanted to use less oil. And the reason for that is that coal at least can be made in the United States. And we can have all the debates about the destruction that causes, but fossil fuel has to come from somewhere. So it uses less oil. It lessens our dependency on importing oils from other countries. And we aren't providing money to countries that potentially want to do harm to us. So in a weird way, it's kind of, I think, the patriotic thing to do. Now, the other thing that's nice about cars that use electricity, at least in part, or even better, if they're 100% electric, is that it makes it easier to transition that car when electricity and batteries get better. You can add battery packs aftermarket. You can put in a solar panel at your house and charge your car for free once you paid for the solar panel from your house. You can put in a wind turbine. All these things are possible and more easy to do and more easy to implement with your car than if your car is 100% gasoline. Because if your car is 100% gasoline, if you want to use electricity in any way, you have to either modify it or replace it. So those are the things that drive me. That, and I think if possible, and it might be years now because I tend to drive cars for a long time. That's why I had a 5 and a 6. So we were driving 11, 12-year-old cars. Next car, I'm hoping, will be an all-electric car. And maybe it'll be like the Volt, which I love. The Volt is an electric car with a gasoline engine that is a generator that creates electricity for the electric car. So you have an all-electric car, and instead of batteries carrying the electricity, you have a fuel tank that carries gasoline. And that's the energy, but then you have to have the engine to burn it, and it's not as efficient, but it's incredibly portable. And at least at this point in time, it's really, really easy to buy gasoline. So I figured out the cost to drive about 200,000 miles, assuming gas is $2.25 a gallon, and assuming that electricity is 11 cents per kilowatt hour. If you drive your vehicle 200,000 miles, and of course, if you never drive 200,000 miles in a car, maybe this doesn't apply to you, but I regularly do with my cars. The cost to drive a truck that gets 20 miles per gallon in gasoline, the fuel cost at least, is $22,500. If gasoline goes to $4 a gallon, that cost becomes $40,000 over a 200,000 mile lifespan of the truck. A conventional car that might get 30 miles per gallon, and not all cars do, a lot of them get less than that, and not all trucks get 20 miles per gallon. I'm just giving you some reference points. Under current fuel costs, the car might cost $15,000 in gasoline, and if the price of gasoline goes up to $4 a gallon, of course that price goes up to about $26,000. Whereas something like the Prius Prime, and I'm assuming it's going to be in the same ballpark for the Chevy Volt, although it gets more electricity. So if you drive 40 or 50 miles or less per trip all of the time and never go farther, that might be a better deal for you. But just to give you a reference, I calculated for my Prius Prime, assuming over the life of the car that I drive half in EV, electric-only mode, and half using the electric gas hybrid mode, that over 200,000 miles, the cost would be about $7,000. And if gas goes up, $10,000, and a 100% all-electric car over 200,000 miles could be below $6,000. I calculated $5,600, but that's going to depend a lot on the efficiency of your car and your electricity rates. But it gives you some ideas. I had someone say, well, Phil, you're never going to save enough to pay for your fancy car. No, that wasn't my motivation. I've already given you my motivation to reduce oil is one of them. But I, of course, turned around and asked them how long was it going to take for them to pay back for their Cadillac Escalade. And they didn't really like that retort. We don't buy cars, at least I don't buy a car, just to save money. It's a really important factor. I want it to be efficient. I want it to cost the smallest amount over time. And I think I saw it in Consumer Reports said that for the first 5 years, the Prius is one of the most affordable cars to drive, which is one of the reasons I drive them. So way more than I expected to go over this story. So let me now tell you about something you can do to get money out of your IRAs if you want to retire early. So I'm going to talk about a thing called SEP. Now, it's not a SEP IRA. That's SEP. This is SEPP, and it stands for Substantially Equivalent Periodic Payments, or substantially equal periodic payments. And it is not something to be taken lightly. You do not want to do this calculation on your own. I do highly recommend that you have a CPA or an enrolled agent, someone who is an expert at calculating tax consequences, help you with this. But it is a method where you can avoid the 10% penalty for taking money out before you are the age of 59 and a half. And so I had a listener, and I've had this question before, but it seemed like the perfect time to do it, ask, what do I do if I've saved up enough money that I can retire at 55, but everything is inside of an IRA or a 401k, and I can't get it out, and I don't want to pay the 10% penalty? So this is how you do that. It's called, again, the Substantially Equivalent Periodic Payments. And you can find more information about this, of course, with the Google, but I like Investopedia, and I will put a link in the show notes. And just as a reminder, the show notes and the feed is moving to Polaris Financial Planning website. I'm going to have some more flexibility and ability to do some things there that I couldn't with the old feed location. This should still be in both locations, but in a couple of weeks I'm going to turn off the old feed. So if a few weeks from now or a few episodes from now, if you're listening to shows back to back, you may lose access to the show. I've been told by my IT experts that you'll never notice. But if you have a problem, let me know, and you can always go to polarisfinancialplanning.com to reconnect the feed there to your favorite podcast player. Of course, if you have any problems with that, you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and I can help you get reset up or fix whatever is broken if that happens. But hopefully it's all seamless. So anyway, I want to go back to this SEP, SEPP, Substantially Equal Periodic Payments, also known by the IRS as Rule 72T. 72T. And again, I will have a link to the IRS rules and the Investopedia article at the blog for the show. That's at polarisfinancialplanning.com, so you can go check that out. So what you basically have to do is you have to agree to a process, and I'm not going to give you all of the details because the show is going a little longer than I wanted in the first place, but you can use the amortization method, the annuitization method, or the required minimum distribution method. And it's a complex way to calculate how much money to take out. And you can take out almost any amount that you want, but whatever way you decide to do it, you have to do it that same way for a minimum of 5 years. So if you start this at the age of 58, and you could take out whatever you wanted to at 59 and a half, that's fine, but you must take out this same method for 5 years. So it's important that you understand the rules. So if you're just retiring 1 or 2 years early, you may not want to do this because you're going to be stuck with it for 5 years. But if you want to retire at 55 and not wait till 59 and a half to start getting your money out, you can do this. But consider carefully how much you're taking out. And that link at Investopedia has some practical examples. And of course, the IRS link shows you all kinds of details about how it works. But you would definitely want to, like I said, have a CPA or an enrolled agent, someone who is an expert at this, help you figure this out. And of course, you can figure it out. Say you're 50 now. You can figure it out now and then just wait till you actually need to do it when you're 53 or 55. So that's something that might help you if you are able to retire a little earlier than the normal because you have saved a lot of money in IRAs and 401ks. Keeping in mind, at least at this point in time, the single biggest roadblock that a lot of my clients face in retiring early is health insurance. If the Obamacare gets repealed, at least in part, how are you going to get insurance? How much is it going to cost you? Don't forget about that. That might be the single biggest, most expensive thing that you've not considered. You know about your house and your cars, and you can plan your vacations, but how much is it going to cost for health insurance? So think about that. And hopefully some of that information you found helpful. And we're going to do a few things to pay the bills here, a little commercial break. And then we're going to go into our interview with Ryan Cragun.
Never felt the slightest interest in the next world. I think it's here, and I think anything good that you're going to do, you should do for other people here, and not do anything to make yourself have a happy time in the next world, you know. No, I don't believe in religion. If you can live for other people, away from yourself, you will be happy. And if you live for yourself, you will be unhappy, and you will then not be able to sleep or do anything else. After all, we have no notion as to what the next world is, if there is one. Mm-hmm. So there's no point in that. But it's always been, I hear a lot of people saying, well, I don't know the difference between good and bad. I know totally, for myself, the difference between right and wrong. Totally. Uh-huh. I know this because wrong makes me very uncomfortable and right makes me very happy. And I don't think it's so very difficult to know when you're doing the right thing and when you're doing the wrong thing. And I think each person, the right thing, the wrong thing, varies.
Here's an excerpt from Nailed by David Fitzgerald.
Didn't there have to have been a Jesus? Perhaps he was just a wandering teacher or an exorcist, an apocalyptic prophet or a zealot who opposed the Romans. Perhaps he was all these things, or even a composite of several such early first-century figures. But at any rate, surely there had to be somebody at the original core of Christianity, arguably the most famous individual in human history. All this seems to be a perfectly reasonable, completely natural assumption to make, so why would anyone be so foolish as to propose that Jesus never existed? Doesn't it just make more sense to assume that there was a historical Jesus, even if we're unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? As it turns out, no. The opposite is true. The closer we look at the evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find, and the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity. And once you begin to parse out the origins of this tradition or that teaching from their various sources, the sweater begins unraveling quickly until it becomes very difficult to buy that there ever was, or even could have been, any historical figure at the center.
Nailed by David Fitzgerald is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
This is Phil Ferguson with Polaris Financial Planning, the home of science-based investing. I see people owning really bad investments all of the time. Many advisors are paid a commission by a big company to sell you something you may not need. It's kind of like church. They create fear, then they tell you what you want to hear, and then they take your money. What you want is an advisor that is paid only by you. That is a fee-only fiduciary advisor. Remember, people work for who they are paid by. You can contact me, Phil, at PolarisFinancialPlanning.com, or listen to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Each show, we have an interesting investing skeptically topic and an interview with someone fighting to end religion. Polaris also gives 10% of gross revenue to support the growing secular movement. You're not just getting better investments, you're helping to change the world. All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson. Of course, you are listening to the cleverly titled Phil Ferguson Show. I have two guests, well, really one guest, but maybe another possible guest. we've talked about before in a few episodes, we have a new standing policy. There is an open microphone for Jesus. And so if my guest and I get anything wrong, anything at all about the life and history of Jesus or Christianity, he can chime in at any time and correct us. And if there's no corrections, we just assume that everything is correct. And, of course, my corporeal guest is Ryan Cragun. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'd love to introduce you to Jesus, my personal friend, but he's not very talkative.
Fair enough. Maybe he'll pop on later.
I once, many years ago, told someone that they asked me why I don't give money at church, and I said I leave $20 on my bedside counter table, and God can take whatever he needs, and apparently he doesn't need it.
Well, perfectly reasonable to me.
Solves that problem. Now, you and I, in a previous rendition of this show, we talked about your older book, and I'm just going to mention that so people can go buy it. Right, so you can make an extra $1 or $2.
Thank you.
What you don't know about religion, but should.
Yeah.
And give me a little synopsis of what that book's about.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a sociologist by training, right? I'm a PhD in sociology. And with that book, I was basically trying to summarize the findings of social science as relates to religion for an educated lay audience, right? I mean, obviously, you got to be able to read charts and graphs because it's full of data, lots of statistics. But the basic idea, I go through a whole bunch of topics, and I compare 4 groups in the U.S. Internationally. It's a little bit different, but there is international data. I compare religious fundamentalists, religious moderates, religious liberals, and the non-religious on a whole bunch of different statistical kind of topics. So we're looking at like attitudes towards women, educational attainment, IQ, incomes, just a variety of different topics, and showing what the social science of religion has known for 50 plus years. We look at prejudice, we look at health and happiness, all sorts of fun topics, and it really is just filled with data. And it was intended to be, kind of a very accessible book. It's got great stories at the beginning of every chapter. The idea just being, hey, here's the evidence that shows that religious fundamentalists are actually not very nice people, got a lot of issues, and religious liberals are closer to us, the non-religious, than most people give them credit for.
But at least the fundamentalists live much longer because of the power of prayer, right?
No.
Oh.
Nope, no evidence for that one. But they can keep trying, right? I mean, go for it. The famed adage in the kind of skeptical communities and secular communities, nothing fails like prayer,
That's right.
certainly applies in that context.
Well, I mean, the only study I'm aware of, and you can jump in here and give me something new, but, they had this study with the people that had potential heart problems or heart surgery, and they had 3 groups. They had the control group, and they had the group that was prayed for, that wasn't told they were prayed for, and then they had a group that was prayed for and were told that they were being prayed for. And
right.
The group that had the worst outcomes was the group that was being prayed for, and they were told they were being prayed for.
Yep, they were more likely to die and have complications and slower recovery time. So,
and it's one study, so you never really know for sure, but maybe, just maybe, they thought, my God, if the hospital has to employ a prayer team,
yeah, I'm going to die.
I'm fucked up, man.
It was one very expensive study, right? $6 million for that study. So
$6 million to tell us that prayer. How many people could we have fed instead of finding out prayer didn't work?
I understand that argument. At the same time, like, I quote that article so often.
That's
I am
true.
so glad they did it. So glad they did it.
And now we have the new book. What was that called again?
How to Defeat Religion in 10 Easy Steps.
10 Easy Steps. As a matter of fact, I think any 2 or 3 of these are pretty powerful, but there are 10 steps, which is pretty cool.
Right. It was modeled after another 10-step program, and a lot of people immediately go, wait, I thought it was a 12-step program. Wrong program. We're talking about Marx's 10 steps.
Well,
so
if you ever put this online, you can say something like, how to defeat religion with this one easy trick.
There you go.
That
was the idea. It's meant
tagline.
to be, humorous, right? Like, obviously you can't defeat religion in 10 easy steps, but come on, gotta try.
Well, you touched on many, many, many subjects, and we're going to talk about some of them because we have to leave something left behind for people to buy. And I just listened to the audiobook in the last 48 hours. It's not a particularly long book.
No, it's pretty short. Tried to get right to the point. The longest chapter is actually the first one, which it's a good chapter, right? But there are some other ones that I think are even better. So you got to get through the first one, it's a little longer, and then the other one's a lot of fun, juicy bits in there.
Yeah, because the first one's a whole 16 pages.
Yeah.
And I listen to it on audiobook like I always do because I generally either don't have time or I can't sit still to read. So it's always been a problem for me. But I end up being in the car or something, and I listen to the audio version, and whoever you hired to read it did a great job.
Oh, that person thanks you.
Yeah. I'm sure.
I tried.
I'm sure he does. And so for the listeners to know, you've got these 10 different steps. I don't know if they're necessarily steps, but 10 different ideas, 10 concepts. And most of them I've thought of before, and it was almost kind of like you were reading my mind on some of these. And one is very, very topical right now in the news today, and that's the first chapter, and that's education.
Sure.
And it's called you titled it Promote and Defend Secular Education, which just means education. As far as some fundamentalists are afraid that education will take away the faith of their children, and I think they should be concerned about that. But what does that say about their religion? So tell us about that chapter.
Sure. There's really compelling evidence that the more education people get, the more it challenges different aspects of religiosity. And note that I am adding nuance here. I know not everybody loves nuance, but the scientific findings on this are a bit complicated, right? So one area where education clearly challenges religion is in terms of religious belief. What you find is the more educated people are, the less likely they are to hold fundamentalist or kind of traditional orthodox beliefs, and they're more likely to hold kind of more nuanced, more progressive beliefs. Where it gets tricky, and that's why I add the nuance, is the more educated people are, if they remain religious, so that's kind of the caveat, they're actually more likely to attend religious services and be actively engaged in their religion. And that's not for any surprising reasons. It turns out people who are more educated generally are more civically engaged, right? So if you consider religious activity a form of civic activity, which some people might debate, it's not at all surprising that people with more education are more religiously engaged, right? So it's tricky. I don't mean to suggest going through undergrad is going to wipe out everybody's religious activity. It's not. It's a little more complicated. But what undergraduate education and then particularly graduate education does is it dramatically alters people's religious beliefs. So that's just one clear illustration of you educate people and people change.
And one thing I have found sometimes really, really, really well educated people, they have a lot of knowledge, not necessarily the best at analyzing it, but they can maintain and retain a lot of knowledge. They possess an ability to convince themselves even more earnestly that they're correct, even while they're missing the logical fallacies that they create themselves. You ever notice that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's pretty compelling evidence that more educated people are harder to persuade, right? Which is kind of interesting when you think about it, because you think, oh, well, they should understand critical thinking. Well, they do. They just employ it to maintain their own beliefs. So little awkward there, but absolutely that's the case. Of course, what we're talking about here is generalizations, right? That more education does result in people being less orthodox in their beliefs. And then there are a couple of good studies showing, if you look internationally, the single best predictor, and I don't necessarily mean that causally. We could get into that if you want.
Oh, I love that. Yes, we might.
Okay. The single best predictor of levels of secularity, how secular a society is around the world, is actually levels of educational attainment. So the causality there, of course, is always tricky. It's hard to say which causes which. What we're really saying is that they're highly correlated, right? So in countries where people are more educated on average, people are also less religious on average. Well, and that's actually the single best predictor, right? Which I think is really interesting. Again, I can't say that it's causally related, but
it's correlated. Does the educated person leave religion, or does the really religious person never get educated? And sometimes it's both.
Exactly. Sometimes it's both.
I mean, I've known people that grew up in the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were actively discouraged from seeking out education.
Yes, they are.
And now we have this growing movement, what I call it, of homeschooling, private schools, vouchers, and I see it as an attack on many, many fronts, where many, many people, for their own personal benefits, because of their religious beliefs or the corporations that they run, or for some other societal norms, they want to destroy mainstream education. What's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a name pops to mind, which is, and I'm not necessarily trying to be political, right? So this isn't necessarily political, but Donald Trump's choice for Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, right? She is one of those people who very much is opposed to public education. She wants vouchers and she wants private education, particularly religious private education. And what they're trying to do is to ensure that children are not actually exposed to ideas that might challenge their religious beliefs, right? So they're trying to educate them, quote unquote, educate them in a religious environment where they can maintain their religious beliefs, because they are genuinely worried that secular education undermines religious beliefs. And of course, there's overwhelming evidence that it does in fact do that.
Right. So, but the religion is more important than knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Not everything could or should be explored. It can only be learned if it doesn't conflict with or weaken the religion that supersedes.
Right. Yeah, and two points kind of come to mind here. There's an argument that I've tried at some level to kind of think of how could I make this argument in a paper, and I just haven't had a good kind of hook on this. So maybe one of your listeners will have a good idea and they can send it to me, and maybe I can write the paper. But something that kind of intrigues me at a certain level is conservatives. Again, not trying to be particularly political, but conservatives in the U.S. do generally tend to oppose public education, secular education. They want religious education for kids. And in so doing, they're basically making it so the U.S. can't compete internationally in terms of levels of education, right? So pulling Donald Trump's very famous quote, "Make America Great Again," by killing secular education, we're going to do exactly the opposite. So my point is, right, like the conservative movement to weaken education in the U.S., every level of secular education, is actually working against the conservative ideal of making America great.
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by great. If you're talking about high tech, I don't know that that's really what they mean. They mean back in the olden days when people knew their place, if you know what I mean. And women stayed at home, I think, is a lot of this patriarchal stuff that kind of sneaks in. But so that's education, and it's one of those things, like you said, that this new appointee, and I'm noticing a pattern here that everyone that Trump apparently is going to appoint hates the department that they're supposed to be in charge of.
It's shocking.
Yeah, and
and I don't know if you typically go political on your shows.
Oh, I do.
Right?
It's screaming liberal on here, and I get some flack for it, but fuck them. That's my viewpoint. It's my show.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I try to be kind of as balanced as I can in my classroom, right? I don't try and bring my political views into my classroom. So I will try and be as balanced as I can. But yeah, it's getting really hard, particularly with today's announcement of Rick Perry as the Secretary of Energy. Right?
I was gonna say that doesn't make any sense. That was one of the departments he wanted to close. Yeah.
So it'll be fascinating to see what they end up doing. Right? It's shocking in so many ways. But well, no, it's not shocking. It's exactly what we would expect. But disturbing, I guess, is the better term. It's just
and we could probably do a whole show on this, and maybe you'll write your next book. Is as bizarre as this seems to you and to me, people who are very conservative Republicans and watch Fox News, they don't see any problem yet with anything that Trump's done.
No. And, we can tie it back to the book and some of the other arguments that I've made. I made this in a article in Free Inquiry not too long ago, where we were talking about like what has led to the rise of the atheist secular movement since about 2001. And there are lots of things, right? I'm not saying that it's one single thing, but one thing that I think helped galvanize the secular movement in the U.S. was George Bush's presidency. So arguably, this is exactly what you would want, is some sort of, and he's not as religious as I think would really work for the secular movement, but he's certainly catering to evangelicals in the U.S., and what we're going to see with the Supreme Court, is obviously going to play into that. But I think at some level, Donald Trump being elected as president holds a lot of potential for actually greater support for the secular movement in the U.S.
Well, and I think, at least in my opinion, and you could disagree here, and maybe you will, but I'm kind of thinking you won't. I think a lot of these things that the conservatives hold to be true are based in religion, and if we attack the individual causes, the individual things, they're the symptoms. Religion is the cause. The idea that you should just believe what you're told when you're growing up as a kid in a church creates the mind that can be told something by Fox News or Donald Trump that just goes, okay, that must be the truth.
Yeah, there's certainly some truth to that. I do think there are areas where progressives and conservatives can genuinely have disagreements, and like respectful disagreements. Then you get areas like climate change, right? Where that's not a reasonable disagreement. There's no reasonable way to disagree about climate change. It's either you're aware of the evidence or you're fucking deluded, right? Like it's one of those two. It's not a reasonable disagreement. And I think you're right. At some level, it's, and again, Donald Trump doesn't strike me as at all religious, so it's hard to say that actually applies to him. But I think it does apply for many people where they just accept things, right? There's a lack of critical thinking.
I think it's comical that anyone thinks that Donald Trump is religious. That busts me up. But he is willing to do enough of the things that they want, or what he thinks that they want, that he can do other things. And all of it freaking scares me. And, we talked about climate change. Another one is sex education. And they actively want to keep information away from young people so that they can control them. And it just so happens that's the second step in your book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the title of that is Empower Gender, Sexual, and Racial Minorities. And there's actually step 4 is a little bit closer to that, which is encourage sexual liberation for everyone. We've known for well over a decade that abstinence-only sex education has the exact opposite effect of what it's intended to do, right? So it doesn't do a very good job of educating at all because there's not really much education. And kids who go through abstinence-only sex education, and we'll come back to the empowering gender, sexual, and racial minorities, but kids who go through that, they're more likely to get pregnant as teenagers, they're more likely to get sexually transmitted infections, they're more likely to have all sorts of problems. And again, like the scientific research has shown this over and over and over again. That said, Congress continues to fund abstinence-only sex education to the tune of millions of dollars every year because it's not about the evidence, right? It's about an ideology, and the ideology is we want to keep kids away from sex, which, again, it has the opposite effect. And then I think at some level, and we're seeing this with what's going on with Planned Parenthood right now, right? By attacking sex education, they're particularly harming women, because women are the ones who often suffer the consequence. And I don't mean pregnancy as a something that you suffer, right? Yes, it's complicated, and some women certainly do. But that's really who it ends up affecting most is women who pay a bigger price in this. And I think that's intentional, right? I think for a lot of them, they do want a more patriarchal society where women are relegated to the home environment, or at least at a minimum are subservient to men. And as a result, that's, by restricting Planned Parenthood and by preventing good sex education, they're really indirectly or even directly targeting women and women's health and women's autonomy in society.
Well, one of the things you have, I think it's in every section, you have recommendations, what either an individual or a local group, community group, or national groups might be able to do inside of this topic. Just throwing some ideas out there, some philosophies or some taglines. Every section is different to inspire the reader/listener to go, hey, that's a good idea, but here's how I could do it, which is great. Do it whatever way you want. And one of the things that just busted me up, and I can't remember if it was the sexual minorities or the sexual liberation thing, but you were talking about funding for abstinence-only education, that if we are going to pay people to not teach, if we are going to pay people to lie, then are we morally justified to create our own program of abstinence-only education, get the funding, and then go into the schools and actually teach proper sex education? Right.
Absolutely. Basically, what I said is we should be dishonest about it, right? So we call it abstinence-only education, or I just pulled it up here, right? Abstinence only, and then in parentheses, until you're ready to have sex curriculum. So we develop our own curriculum. We can call it abstinence only or put that in the title and then actually go and teach them good sex education. Because, they're not respecting the evidence. Why should we be honest with them about what it is we're going to do?
I like that a lot, because it's like, if you're going to play games with facts, if you're going to lie and deceit and trick kids into thinking they're getting valuable information, is it now wrong for us to lie and deceive to actually give good information? And we could probably have an entire show about the ethical ramifications of that. But I liked it as a new idea. It was something I had not thought of before, and I thought, well, that's kind of cool.
That's what I'm trying to do with this book. I'm just pushing people a little bit to go, maybe we're approaching that in a slightly erroneous way, right? And I do this regularly in my work. I must have some sort of strange component to my brain, right? But I don't know if you recall this, but I did write an article for Free Inquiry looking at tax subsidies that we give to religions.
I know it very well.
Yeah, it got a lot of attention, and that's great. But there was one part in there that I'm still very, very proud of. Given all of the tax subsidies that religions get and the limited oversight that religions literally don't have to report anything when it comes to finances and taxes. This is one of my other crazy, kind of batshit crazy ideas. I said, it would make so much sense for secular communities to team up with their local drug dealers and start a religion and then launder their money through the religion, right? It's a win-win. So the secular groups, they take a small cut, doesn't have to be a lot, and the drug dealers, right, they get their money laundered, and no one's the wiser because it literally takes a sitting senator to request the IRS to audit a religion. That's not going to happen.
Well, the one scheme that I had with my investing business is to actually call it a religion, and I would hire myself as the high priest of Polaris Financial Planning.
There you go.
And I would pay myself a housing allowance because, as you probably know,
parsonage exemption.
A housing allowance paid to a called employee, and there's a very wide swath of what can be called because no one wants to fight with it. And if that money is spent 100% for housing, it's still not taxed.
Right. No, the loopholes are endless, and no one is
stacked on top
this.
of each other. And I spent several years on a church school board, and it just so happened that this church not only was the minister and the principal, but the office secretary and the janitor and most of the teachers and a lot of the people who were coaches for the sports teams. They were all, and I have my radio air quotes up, everybody, they were all called, and which meant they weren't hired. They were brought by divine inspiration to come work for the church, and as an integral part of their employment, wink, wink, was the proselytization. And so they were called by God, and so up to 100% of their income could be considered a housing allowance, and they would pay no tax on all of their income.
Yeah. The current system is remarkably broken, and until we have political will, it's really not going to change, right?
And so, of course, one of the chapters, one of the 10 steps is to not subsidize religions in these ways.
Right. So I do argue in there we need to stop subsidizing religion and deregulate it. And I've had some actually really good conversations with different people, including some people at some of the national organizations. One of the things that I talk about when I talk about that chapter to kind of, different, when I speak at different places is I think the national organizations, and again, I love the national organizations. I'm not trying to be, mean about this at all, but I think their approach to tax subsidies and all of these policies has been slightly misguided because they're trying to go at it at the federal level. So one of the things that I actually suggested is you need to find sympathetic state representatives or senators in states that are already kind of close to majority non-religious. Washington State, Oregon, right? Or New Hampshire, or maybe Vermont, or even Maine, right?
Right.
You need to start at a local level and see if, and the first step is really, really a very, very small step. At a local level, you just require religions to report their finances like charities.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I mean, it's that small. It's not a huge step. And how can religions really defend, oh, no, this is unduly burdensome, which is what they're arguing now at the federal level, right? If you can get the political will at the state level just to get that one change, I think it would be a domino effect, right? Pretty quickly, people would be blown away at how much money these religions actually bring in, because the numbers are staggering. But they would be blown away, and just having that information would lead to a domino effect of like, well, I want to know how much the religions are making in my state. So we get, all of the blue states, if you will, would pretty quickly adopt this. And once you have it at the state level, then it scales up, right? So I think that's actually a better approach than trying to go straight at the federal level and challenge it, in federal court. Let's just try it at the state level and see what happens.
Work it in a little bit. Kind of the wedge strategy, which also appears in your book, of course.
Absolutely.
I lived in a small town called St. Joseph, Illinois. He's the patron saint of real estate, by the way, in case you didn't know. And they had a situation where they had 1 or 200 acres of land that was in the city proper, so it was getting city taxes. And it was the next piece of land to be developed into a massive neighborhood with 200 or 300 houses. And it's a small town, so that would be like a 10-15% increase in the number of houses in this small town. And the owner of it passed away, and he had donated it in his will to one of the churches in town.
Sure, yeah.
And the church has a nice church already in town. I mean, this is only 5 or 6 blocks away. It's a very small town. They're not going to go and build a big mega church. The town's too small. And so they rent it out to farmers, and they make all this money, and they pay tax, I think, on the profit, but they don't pay property tax.
Nope.
And so when this big chunk of land just vaporized and disappeared off the local city's tax rolls, they all of a sudden couldn't pay their bills.
Yeah, that's happening all over the U.S. There's actually a good article, a newspaper article that came out within the last 2 months looking at property taxes and religions in New York State. And the reporter did a really good job of digging into the rolls and showing that even though religiosity is declining in a number of counties in New York State, the number of parcels of land that have religion tax exemptions is going up, right? And she's like, well, how do you explain this? I said, look at the tax benefits, right? The tax benefits are obvious. So if you can find any way to claim that you are a religious functionary, then you're going to do it. And as a result, the tax benefits are pretty remarkable. So, and then they, of course, have all sorts of advantages competing with corporations and other entities. I think we're eventually just going to have to get to the point where people start questioning that, or it gets so bad that you have more and more entities, political entities like this city that you were in, where they can't pay their bills. They literally can't pay their bills because everything is exempt, right? And once you get there, it's time to rethink.
Yeah, the whole system breaks down. And it's one of those things, another neat topic that you had that I've thought about for many years is to compare America to Europe, and maybe this doesn't hold up, but it's a fun thought experiment. They have state religion, but yet they've become non-religious. Does one cause the other or not? But you talk about going to some of these countries where the minister is actually employed by the government, and they've got a posh job for life. They get paid whether anyone comes in or not, so they just go through the motions and they sing a song, and nobody shows up, and they don't give a shit because they get paid. Where in the United States, it's a la carte, and you've got to compete. And when you've got to compete, it's survival of the fittest. So the religion that makes the most money wins the game. So you change this, you change that, you change everything. Maybe we should have a state religion.
It's really controversial. I've brought this up again at several of the talks that I've done to local groups. And when I say, we should break down that wall, I mean, you would not believe the hysteria that ensues.
I would believe it.
So many secular people, right, are just so determined that we've got to build the wall even stronger, right? And I'm like, okay, if you want to do that, that's fine. That's one approach. But where religion is the weakest is also where walls are the smallest and kind of most permeable. And that's in Western Europe, where many of these places have state churches, right? And as a result, right, when you pass gender equality in the country, right, that women have the right to vote and they can have all these jobs, guess what the religions have to do? They have to implement it, right? When you allow same-sex marriage, guess what the religions have to do? They have to implement it too. So when you have a close alliance where, of course, the state has the upper hand, right? If it's the other way around, then you get, Muslim dictatorships, right. And that's really, really bad. But where government has the upper hand, having a broken down wall, right, actually results in the weakening of religion.
Yeah, and I always wondered if it was that, and I think that's part of it, but I also kind of envisioned this thing where, rebellious teenager, when Americans are in high school and they rebel against their family a little bit, and I'm assuming some a lot, some not so much, but most teenagers rebel some level. They also rebel against the idea of the government, and then they start getting these really wacky ideas that like libertarianism might actually work. And at the same time, while they're turning against big government, it's tied to religion, and they turn against religion. But in the United States, they turn against big government and against their parents and their families, and they can just switch to another religion.
They can. One of the fun things that we've known, again, for 20 or so years is confidence in organized religion. So confidence in organizations of all sorts has been declining over the last 40 years. So that's everything, government and banks and even science, right? Like everything has been going down. But faster than any of the others has been confidence in organized religion. Yay. So it's kind of an interesting finding, right? Like people don't really trust organized religion all that much in the U.S. anymore, despite the fact that we claim that many people are religious, right? Which is so much bullshit, because it's 1 in 5 Americans, if that, are actually in church on a given week, right? It's not the 40% who claim they are. And even if 70+% say that they are religious, most of those people aren't going to church. So we talk about how religious, quote unquote, the American population is, particularly compared to Western Europe and other places. But when you actually dig deeper into those numbers, a sizable percentage of people are saying they're religious, but they're not in any meaningful sense of the word.
Another thing that I've experienced, personal experience, and you can tell me if there's any evidence to support it other than just my personal experience. Like sure. With my kids, they're 19, 21. In the world that they've grown up in, they've always had a phone. I mean, at least since they were like 12, and they've had email, and they have grown up an entire life knowing that people are trying to trick them, that any email with an attachment could be a Trojan, or and sometimes they learn through trial and error that their computer gets hacked, and they go, okay, I can't do that anymore. And if I get an email from someone who's a friend and it's got a weird link, that maybe I should send them an email back and say, did you send this to me? Or they call them, and things are called into question, and you've always got to kind of be careful because someone's trying to trick you, where if you grew up in the 60s and 70s, that generally, at least on that kind of personal level, wasn't happening. So when kids like mine end up going into a church and there's a guy wearing a dress up on the dais and he starts saying crazy things, they look at that and they go, that just doesn't sound right. Let me check that out. And they do a web search and they go, wait a minute. They're trying to trick me too. Is that something that's happening, or is that just I'm really lucky parent?
You're a really good parent.
Oh, you're so sweet.
You should give yourself credit for raising skeptical, critical thinking kids, right? And of course, and I don't know how long they've been outside of religion. Did they ever go to church, or no? They've never.
Yeah, matter of fact, that's a whole nother long story that a lot of my regular listeners know. But I became an atheist at 13. I married an agnostic, and then we had a kid. And suddenly she became very mildly deistically, kind of sort of religious-y. And the more she was in it, the worse it got, until we got to a point where we were watching a show about evolution, and she goes, I don't think evolution actually happened.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what? She was a history/biology major in college. And,
wow.
And now we had these young kids, and they were going to Missouri Synod Lutheran, which I didn't know when we signed up because I'm a dumbass, that they're young earth and that women don't really get to vote and shit.
Right.
And that my kids were going, and I was supporting it. I was encouraging it, at least by my silence. And at some point, I ended up on the church school board, and when I stopped doing that, when I stopped pretending, when I stopped playing along and I got really involved in the secular movement, my kids got to see a whole different side of things. And it was a very short period of time that they were out. But part of that was because even while they were going to church, they'd be watching TV and there's a cool toy on and they say they want that. And I go, well, why do you think you want that now, having seen that commercial?
Right. And
they'd walk through why someone did that, who made that commercial, and why did they make it? Because they want to make money. So what are they trying to convince you? And is someone trying to make money when you're at church? And just fun things like that. So once I stopped pretending, they just kind of fell out. But they had about a year and a half where they were still compelled to go to Sunday school, and they decided that if they had to go, they were going to take out as many kids they could with them. And so they started learning how to ask really, really difficult questions, and the Sunday school teachers could not handle them.
Right. But again, so this is really more a reflection of your socialization of those kids and the fact that they were trained with some they were brought up with some critical thinking skills, right?
Yeah.
I grew up Mormon. That comes out in all my books, right? That I grew up Mormon. I'm the only member of my family who has left the Mormon church, and I'm one of 9 kids, right? So I have a huge family. And I look at many of my nieces and nephews, most of them, of course, right? They don't question. They don't ask questions.
And do they really believe the whole seer stone thing?
They do.
Really? Come on.
Absolutely.
That hurts, man.
They do. And it's mind-boggling to those of us who are on the outside, right? We're like, you guys believe in fucking magic rocks, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what it is. But they don't see it that way because, and we have technical terms. I don't mean to go technical terms on you, right? But in sociology, we call it a plausibility structure and a sacred canopy, right? So they have the canopy. It's like an umbrella that surrounds them. We call it a sacred canopy because it's all of their beliefs, right? And you can think of it, I like the idea of an umbrella, is all of those secular criticisms are like the rain.
Right.
And they can't get through the umbrella, the sacred canopy. It's designed to keep our criticisms away. And churches, yes, we can be critical. I am very critical, but at times I kind of step back and go, man, they are so smart. They have started inoculating their kids, their the youth in the religions against these ideas. So when the Mormon Church came out and said, here's a picture of Joseph Smith's seer stone, right? They did that. They did that just in the last 2 years. It was very intentional. They put it in a specific article where they write it from a believer's perspective. They put a faithful twist on it, and all they're doing is just inoculating the youth against people like you and me who are going to say that's absurd, they'll be like, well, I've heard a different perspective on it. And of course, I know about it now. So I don't really feel threatened when you criticize it. Religions are not stupid. They hire social scientists just like me. I know them, right? The Mormon Church has over 40 of them full time, whose job it is to read the scientific literature and figure out how to apply that to their youth. Churches do this. They're not stupid. You have to respect them, right? They are not stupid. Sometimes, we want to just be like, oh, they're a bunch of dumb idiots. No.
No. I think I agree with you that we don't give them enough credit for how devious they are.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've told people before, one of the sayings that I have is that apologetics doesn't have to be good. It has to be good enough.
Yeah, that's all it has to be.
And it just has to be. I remember talking to someone once about the story of Jephthah. I don't know if you know that story where he goes off to war and he says whoever meets him at his house when he comes back, he'll sacrifice to God. And you also find out that he's not married and he only has one child. So unless you thought maybe he was going to sacrifice the dog, you knew it was going to be the daughter, right? And so she comes out and greets him and he has to sacrifice her. And I was telling that story to someone about how appalling that is. And they said, no, if you look back at the ancient Aramaic or whatever bullshit they said to me, he didn't sacrifice her, like burn her, even though it says that, a funeral pyre. She was sacrificed to the Lord and she became a nun. And I'm like, if you just look, here, just read. And they go, I don't need to read it. I already know it.
Yeah.
And so the apologetics was awful, but it was good enough.
Exactly.
Anyway, so we've got another topic here, holidays and rituals. Talk to me about that. I love that part of the book.
Sure. So, and we have to tie this in to American Atheists' campaign right now because I was delighted. I saw that today and was just delighted to see what's going on.
I haven't seen it. What I missed? What are they doing?
Well, let me explain the chapter and then we'll come back to it because I think they took my idea.
Oh,
and
I'm sure they did.
I don't know that I can claim credit, right? But I know David Silverman has read my book. I know a number of people there have, and I would love to believe that they actually kind of saw the light on this. Anyway, so the idea is, and we'll use Christmas because we're headed right into Christmas, right? And that's fine. A lot of people, and I don't think it's the majority, but a lot of people in the secular community try and oppose religious holidays, right? They're like, oh, Christmas, it's Christian. We got to attack it. We'll replace it with Human Light Day, or we'll have a solstice celebration or something like that. Whenever I give talks, right, I go around and give a number of talks. I ask people in the audience of these secular groups, how many of you celebrate Christmas, right? And they're all atheists and humanists in the audience. And it's invariably 75 to maybe 95% of the audience are like, yeah, I celebrate Christmas. And I'm like, do you really think we have even a remote chance of destroying Christmas? Christmas is pervasive. It's not everywhere.
Christians couldn't stop it.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Right.
I mean, it starts months in advance, and it's, certainly there's the commercial aspect to it, and that's fine. I'm not trying to kind of get down that path, but we can't stop it. So what we have to do is be, and note the wording here, at least as smart as the religious. Okay? They have known for millennia that you don't fight these things, you co-opt them. And the term that people in religious studies and sociology use for this is syncretizing, right? We take the holidays and we make them secular.
You make it your own.
Yes, we just co-opt those holidays, right? So my argument in the book is secular people, atheists, humanists, we have to out-Christmas the Christians. We have to have the best holiday lights out on our house. We have to give everybody on our street Christmas presents, and we wish them Merry Christmas. We know what we mean by it, right? But it just fucks with them when they see atheists saying Merry Christmas. And that's why I'm delighted by what American Atheists did this year, right? Instead of saying Christmas is silly, just like Santa Claus is made up, Jesus is made up, they didn't do that. They wished people Merry Christmas and then put American Atheists on it, right? So their big billboard that I saw just a picture of today, and I was like, oh, this is perfect, right? It was Make Christmas Great Again. And then at the bottom, they threw in Skip Church.
Yeah, and it's in red and white, just like Donald Trump's.
Isn't that great?
Oh,
they're full on saying,
just-
like, we are celebrating Christmas and we're atheists and we want your Christmas to be great too.
I just
so
pulled
just
it up.
skip church.
Yeah,
Isn't it great?
This is awesome, and
They're doing it. They're syncretizing Christmas, and I'm so delighted. Like, I'm so excited.
have you seen the other one that they have on their website?
I saw a second one. What does the other one say? I don't remember.
The second one has an African American mother-daughter on the left, and then there's text message bubbles like from an Android or Apple phone, and it says, "You go in the church this Xmas? LOL, no way, I don't believe that stuff anymore. What will your parents say? They'll get over it." And then on the right it says, "Atheist Christmas, the more the merrier."
See, they did it.
Oh.
They're syncretizing.
I
There's
love
no
it.
fighting here.
No. Well, the one idea that I've always pitched to David Silverman, and he said that he'd put it up as soon as I paid for the billboard, so I might have to do that. But my idea was on the left third of the billboard is a beautiful gold embossed Holy Bible. Mm-hmm. And then the right 2/3 just says, "Read the Bible, we dare you, American atheists," which is not co-opting the holiday or anything.
Right,
but,
right.
But yeah, there's all these different strategies, and one of the things I really get hung up on when sometimes in the secular / atheist movement is so many times people are saying you're doing it wrong, and there's so many ways to do it. Sometimes it's by being nice, sometimes it's co-opting holidays, and all of this stuff is stuff that the average reader can do. I kid you not, everybody, this book is under $12 on Amazon. It sells like a sales pitch. The audio book cost me $3.50. I don't know how you can get money out of that, but
It's fine.
you can do some of these things. You can be on a school board and protect education. You can fight for reproductive rights and sexual rights and sexual liberation. You can encourage, and we hadn't even talked about it, but I don't want to take an entire hour of your time, but
It's okay.
Promoting arts and sciences and critical thinking and co-opting these holidays. I love it all. And somebody can employ 1 or 2 steps. Some people can employ 8 of them.
Absolutely. That's the idea. I mean, I really meant for this to be, and it's, the subtitle is A Toolkit for Secular Activists. So it's meant to be like, here, take this, you read it, and if you're alone, right, if you're that solitary person in rural Mississippi who's an atheist, you can take it, you can read it, and you can do some of these steps. But if you're part of a group, you can bring this to your group meetings, right? And again, I don't mean to be like pitching my book all over the place.
No,
but,
pitch it.
But take it and just like take some of the ideas. There's another one. I just got an email. I'm, again, super excited about this, and you can find some of these on my website. The Sunday Assembly in, I want to say Sacramento, California. It's out in California. I was just out there this summer, and I gave a couple of talks to different places. They're singing secular Christmas carols for their Christmas celebration. What I do in that chapter 8, right, when I talk about syncretizing holidays, is I say, look, a lot of those Christmas songs that so many of us grew up listening to, and we still hear them everywhere, right? They originally come from like pagan melodies and things like that. And of course, Christians took them, they syncretized the music, which is exactly what we need to do back. They took them and they overlaid Christian lyrics on top of them. So my argument is we take them right back, we overlay, and we got to be careful how we do this, we overlay very positive, friendly, universal values into the lyrics. So I rewrote Silent Night, for instance, using that approach. You can't turn it around and just mock religion. You do that and you alienate the people who we want to listen to the music, right? You have to write it in the right tone, the right way. And I've got examples, and I've redone, I think it's 3 or 4 songs. They're on my website, right? So you can go on my website, ryantcragun.com. It's my professional website, and you'll find them right away. And you can use them. I've licensed all of this as a Creative Commons, right, license. So you can take it, you could record this, you could make $1 million off of this if you've got that kind of musical ability. I just want people to take the idea and run with it, because we really have to syncretize the music. The music's beautiful. Yeah, it really is.
I mean, that's a lot of those melodies, like you said, they were either folk or pagan or culturally historic from all over the world, and they're beautiful pieces of music. And they said, hey, we can't get rid of this. Let's make it ours, and I want us to take it back. And I love this idea of we can. I mean, people ask me all the time, they're like, Phil, what do you think of Christmas music? I adore Christmas
So do
music.
I.
Even the religious ones. I hate to say it, but I think they're great. And I was involved with picking the music for my mom's funeral. You didn't know, but she died 2 months ago.
Oh, I'm
and,
sorry.
Well, thank you. And I picked Amazing Grace.
Sure.
Because
It's beautiful.
I just absolutely adore it. And of course, the other song that has become even more popular now is Leonard Cohen's "Hallelujah."
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I just listen to that song and I almost tear up. And I don't. I mean, the lyrics are nice, but I don't know, just the way it flows to me, it like speaks to me. So you take stuff like that, and especially if it's like you said, it's really old music. 70, 80 years old, the classics, and you can rewrite the lyrics, and you're free and clear. So somebody take that, and next Christmas, damn it, I want a fucking Atheist Christmas album, and I want people to buy tens of thousands of copies. So
do I.
Someone figure that out. I can't. It's best if I don't sing. I did karaoke.
I can't sing either.
I did karaoke once.
I did really well with the lyrics, right? Unfortunately, I'm just like really pressed for time, or I would just take, a dozen of them. But we need a big name, right? And I don't do pop music at all, right? So I don't know who the big name would be. But if we could get a big name to catch on to this, where somebody rewrites all the lyrics for a dozen songs that are all beautiful and Christmassy, but not about Jesus, right? And they're secular and universal, and we get a big name to record them, they'll take over.
I don't know why I just got they have a brand new album out, but it would be so bizarre because I don't think they have a Christmas album. Matter of fact, I know they don't have a Christmas album, but you get somebody that's huge like Green Day.
Yeah.
Does rock versions in Green Day style of all these secularly revamped Christmas songs.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
I mean, that's what we need, right?
I'm going to call Billy Joe and tell him.
Do it, right? Again, I'm giving away the lyrics, right? Like I don't want money from this. I want to win this kind of, I don't want to use the word war, right? But this kind of battle that we're having over the nature of Christmas. That the key is not to destroy Christmas; it's to co-opt it and make it secular.
Well, and I think we have a lot to learn from religions, and I have a talk that I do about how to. It's called Breaking the Cycle: How to Get Kids Out of Religion, and how to actively teach skepticism to little kids. And the first time I even suggested it, people thought, "Well, that's what churches do." And I go, "I know."
Yeah,
I want to. They figured out how to do this, and they know that if they can tell this stuff to a 5 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10-year-old, by the time they're 13, it's going to stick for most of them.
Yep.
They already figured that out. We have to figure that out too, and not go, well, we're just going to keep our hands clean until they're 21 and then try to talk to them. Well, it's too late, my friends. We got to get in the trenches. I know I didn't want to take a whole hour, but we've had so much fun. Are there any topics that you're dying to cover that we still haven't? Because there's several things we haven't covered. I mean, the readers need to buy it, but
sure.
Anything that's really top of your mind that you want to cover?
We hit a lot of the really fun things. There are lots of other things in there that are fun. I will throw out. There's a joke at the beginning of each chapter that I wrote, right? And I'm not great at jokes, but I tried really hard. What'd you think? Were the jokes okay?
The jokes were good. It's funny because one of the thoughts that I had was, you didn't tell me who wrote the joke. So I guess they were good enough for me to wonder why you didn't give citation, and now I know why. So
I wrote those, right? Which I'm not great, right? I'm not going to claim like these are the best jokes ever, but some of them I thought were actually pretty good.
Well, there's that, and like I said, there's tips for what individuals can do, what groups can do, what national groups can do. Right. Use those as mind ticklers and come up with your own ideas. That's fine. Take it to a meeting and throw it around and see if you can get 2 or 3 people to join you in just one idea and try to do it in your local community. It really is a handbook. I mean, it's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, it's full of concepts and ideas. And then you even had a little bit of a point there. I can't remember which section it was. Oh, it was with living together. Couples living together becoming less religious. And I'm like,
right.
Well, Ryan, you must know that correlation does not mean causation. And then you freaking explained it right after I had that thought. So you even went into that. So that was great too.
I know my audience, Phil.
That's right.
It's a skeptical community, and they all know correlation doesn't equal causation. But in this case, you know what? The evidence works for it.
Well,
So
I
it's
tell
a
you
fun
what,
one.
if I had time, skill, and all the research, I could have written this book. But I don't have those things. So
I understand.
I just chat with people on the phone, and we have a good time, and we record it. How can people learn more about you and your books?
It's pretty easy. So if you know my name, it's Ryan T, as in Tom. It's my middle initial, right? Cragun.com. And you can find everything up there. I'm a huge fan of open access to everything. So all of my published articles, there are many, many published articles. They're all on my website, free for the taking, right? So you can download those and read them. Most of my book chapters, I have more than a dozen book chapters, are up there. The books, of course, are not up there for you to just download, right? But there are links to all the books that I've written up there on my website. That'll take you to Amazon or whatever, and you can get them fairly inexpensive.
And I do want to let everybody know it's Cragun.
Yes.
There's no Y. It's just
Bingo.
Cragun, all one word. Facebook, Twitter, any of that stuff?
I'm on both, right? So I do have an author page on Facebook that I post to occasionally, and you can always get in touch with me that way. I'm on Twitter as well. On Twitter, I am actually probably the most critical of religion, and I talk about my findings from my research projects and stuff like that. So that's a good place to kind of catch what I'm thinking as I'm thinking it, is on Twitter.
Great. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for spending time with us here on The Phil Ferguson Show. I greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
The Pope could decide that all this power, all this wealth, this hierarchy of princes and bishops and archbishops and priests and monks and nuns could be sent out in the world with money and art treasures to put them back in the countries that they once raped and violated, whose original systems of animism and belief and simplicity they told would take them straight to hell. They could give that money away, and they could concentrate on the apparent essence of their belief. And then I would stand here and say the Catholic Church may well be a force for good in the world. But until that day, it is not.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed that. I had great fun, and I think there's many wonderful ideas at how you can do your part to help end religion, or at least end influence of religion in our world, and at least maybe in the country you're in, or for most of my listeners in the United States. So hopefully you got something from that. And the book is cheap, and the Audible version is $3.50. Come on. Just download it, listen to it on a car ride. It's only a couple hours long. It's not that complicated. Just listen to it, get inspired, get some ideas. And the other thing that I like to talk about this part of the show is reviews. And I've been reading them from iTunes, and I have learned that Stitcher has reviews. And on Facebook, I asked some listeners to go and leave reviews at Stitcher. So I'm going to cover a couple of those here in a minute. But before I did that, I wanted to mention that Stitcher does have a list of the top shows in spirituality and religion. What I love is that 6 of the top 9 are atheist or skeptical. I love that. Absolutely love that. So if someone uses the Stitcher website or the Stitcher app and they want to search for a show about religion, they're going to find these shows and many more. There's others that aren't in the top 9, of course. And the Phil Ferguson Show, which is about 1/3 finance and 2/3 atheism, give or take, is now ranked at 46. So that is great, and it's been moving up the list because the number of listeners keeps increasing, and because some listeners went and made reviews there. So you could help me out. I don't have a Patreon account. That's not my business model. My model is to educate and give out information, and every once in a while I get a client from doing this. So, of course, if you're interested in that, you can contact me. But if you want to help out, go leave a review at Stitcher. It helps the ranking. It'll help me get to a bigger audience. And the show, which a year ago was getting 1,000 or 2,000 listens a week at most, is now getting 15,000 listens per show. The month that just finished was over 51,000, almost 52,000 listens. And this month we're on pace to beat 60. So thank you for sharing, and welcome all of the new listeners. There must be a lot of you because you weren't here a year ago. So I'm delighted that you found the show. I'm delighted that you like the show. And if you have show topic suggestions, you can email them to me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Unfortunately, now I get far too many show ideas to cover them all, but go ahead and send them, and I can pick and choose from those and see what I get. And now I want to go over the reviews that are at Stitcher. There are 6, star ratings of 5, which is 5 out of 5. So thank you. And 5 people wrote comments. So I'm going to go through those kind of quickly here. The first one is Gilberto. I've said it in English, or Gilberto in Italiano. Atheism and financial advice definitely sets this show aside from the others. Excellent, thank you. And we have Rob Hyman, the only podcast to have 1/3 financial and 2/3 secular. They're putting up my talking points here. Thank you. Fine job, Phil. Keep up the great work. From Limburg, I love hearing skeptical investment advice and atheism discussions. The show has both. Keep up the good work. From Science Mom, this is the newest one. This show saves me money and is entertaining simultaneously. Well, thank you. Sort of like finding out that chocolate is a health food. Yay. This is seriously my favorite podcast. I like Phil's attitude and delivery as well. What I have learned has given me the confidence to manage my own investments and to take charge of our money. Keep up the great work. Well, thank you, Science Mom. That was a very nice review. And the last one here is a little longer. Let's see if I can keep reading. As an atheist and someone who doesn't understand investments very well, they generally terrify me. This show seems almost tailor-made for me. I love the format, which features financial topics as well as topics of interest to the secular/atheist community. I always seem to learn something new. I appreciate that Phil sticks to the facts when it comes to finances. He has helped to demystify many financial topics for me. The show never drags and never seems as long as it is. Ooh, I think I like that. I've been devouring the back catalog of episodes and looking forward to new ones, and that is from Chuck Farley. So thank you to everyone that has left a Stitcher review. And hopefully if you listen on Stitcher, or if you've never listened on Stitcher and would just like to go make a review there, that would be very, very helpful to me, because it ends up increasing my rankings on Stitcher, and it may expose more people to what I hope is the helpful information on investing, and hopefully the helpful information on how they can get religion out of their life. Because of the 2 topics for the show, I have had emails from many people that came to the show because of the investment topics, and they kind of hang around and listen to the atheism stuff, and I'm hoping that is going to eventually reach some people and help them out of religion. So I'll wrap up for now, and thank you again for listening to the show. We'll talk to you another time. Ciao.
So pay attention, it's essential. This ain't no front hug zone. You ain't that fly, you ain't my Jones. Stop and listen. No front hugs and no kissing. I ain't that scared to call your mama. You'll be riding home in a coma. I got my crew, you ain't got nothing. Follow these rules, yeah, cause we ain't bluffing now. You ain't no rabbi, you ain't no priest. So rise up off me like the showbread with no yeast. Now don't use that front hug, boy. That makes things awkward. That's inappropriate now. You back up off her, cause we wanna keep our minds pure, wanna keep away Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ's love. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ's love. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. We be walking like, we be talking like, we be side hugging every day and night. It's how we do, boo. This ain't no club, so don't be hating on me when I show no love. We living holy, it ain't no thing. So put your hands in the air and let that shoulder hang. I'm going global, cause you don't know me. I'm buying babies like Angelina Jolie. So quit that hugging and slow down, mama, and hit my fist like President Obama. Now, Democratic shift in the Congress. Revolt. Democratic shift in the Congress. Revolt. Democratic shift in the Congress. Revolt. Oh, give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ's love. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ's love. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. I'm a married man, you know I can't hold hands. Front hug all day long with no other demands. But I ask for all of you until you say I do. No front hugging or PDA or your EG time is through. But some of y'all are slick, try to pull this trick. Your hug starts from the side, but soon it turns legit. So if you end up here, then go ahead and scream it. When I hug people, I leave room for the Holy Spirit. If a girl walks up with her arms spread wide and she's front hug bound without looking her eye, you better turn to the side, pat her on the back.